Lady Cordelia Ashworth adjusted her designer sunglasses nervously as she approached the security checkpoint at London Heathrow Airport. The weight of her carry-on bag felt heavier than usual, and beads of perspiration formed on her forehead despite the air conditioning. She had done this many times before, but today felt different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. The former royal aide had spent 15 years serving the fictional kingdom of Valdoria's beloved Queen Margaret, who had passed away 6 months ago. During her time at Thornfield Palace, Cordelia had witnessed the Queen's declining health and had gradually begun to justify her actions to herself. The Queen was old, forgetful, and wouldn't miss a few pieces from her vast collection. Besides, Cordelia reasoned, she deserved compensation for years of loyal service at modest wages while watching the royal family live in luxury. It started small. A silver letter opener here, an antique brooch there. Items that seemed insignificant among the thousands of treasures scattered throughout the palace. Cordelia had developed a sophisticated system over the past 2 years, carefully selecting pieces that wouldn't be immediately missed and gradually moving them from the palace through various means. She had contacts in the art underworld who were more than willing to purchase authentic royal artifacts, no questions asked. The security line moved slowly, giving Cordelia time to review her cover story once more. She was traveling to Geneva for a vacation, carrying personal belongings and some costume jewelry inherited from her grandmother. She had practiced the story countless times, ensuring every detail was perfect. Her passport bore the name Sarah Mitchell, a carefully crafted identity she had been building for months in preparation for her final heist and eventual disappearance. Today's cargo was her most ambitious yet. Hidden within false compartments of her specially modified luggage were 3 priceless items from Queen Margaret's private collection. An emerald necklace dating back to the 16th century, worth an estimated £2 million, a diamond-encrusted tiara that had belonged to Queen Margaret's great-grandmother, valued at nearly £3 million, and a set of ruby earrings that had been a wedding gift to the Queen 50 years ago, worth approximately £1 million. The total value of her current haul exceeded £6 million, enough to ensure a comfortable retirement in a non-extradition country. Cordelia had already secured a buyer in Switzerland who specialized in acquiring rare pieces for private collectors who asked no questions about provenance. As she approached the metal detector, Cordelia's heart rate increased. She had invested considerable money in having her luggage professionally modified by someone who specialized in helping wealthy individuals transport valuable items discreetly. The false bottoms and hidden compartments were lined with materials designed to avoid detection by standard airport security equipment. The security officer, a middle-aged man named James Potter, had been working at Heathrow for over a decade. He had developed an instinct for spotting nervous travelers, and something about the well-dressed woman in front of him triggered his attention. Her expensive clothing and confident demeanor didn't match the subtle signs of anxiety he had learned to recognize. The way she kept touching her bag, the slight tremor in her hands, and the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Cordelia placed her bag on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector without incident. She breathed a small sigh of relief as the machine remained silent. However, her relief was short-lived as she noticed the security officer studying the X-ray monitor with unusual intensity. The image showed her luggage, and while the hidden compartments were designed to be invisible to casual inspection, James had seen something that caught his attention. The density patterns in certain areas of the luggage appeared inconsistent with typical travel items. James had received special training in identifying suspicious luggage modifications, and the irregular shadows on his screen suggested that this bag had been professionally altered. He made a decision that would change both his life and Cordelia's forever. "Excuse me, miss," James called out as Cordelia reached for her bag. "I'm going to need to conduct a more thorough inspection of your luggage. Please step aside." Cordelia's blood ran cold, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem? I'm simply traveling with personal belongings and some family jewelry." James's colleague, Officer Patricia Williams, joined them as they moved to a private inspection area. Patricia had 15 years of experience in customs enforcement and had been specifically trained in detecting high-value smuggling operations. The combination of James's initial suspicion and Patricia's expertise would prove to be Cordelia's undoing. The inspection area was a small, windowless room equipped with advanced scanning equipment and tools for detailed luggage examination. Cordelia watched nervously as the officers began their methodical inspection, still hoping that her expensive modifications would hold up under scrutiny. James began by carefully examining the exterior of the bag, running his hands along the seams, and checking for any irregularities in the construction. The bag was beautifully crafted, made from the finest leather with gold-plated hardware, the kind of luggage that wealthy travelers regularly used. However, his trained fingers detected subtle inconsistencies in the weight distribution and thickness of certain sections. Patricia operated a handheld scanner that provided more detailed imaging than the standard X-ray machines. As she moved the device over different sections of the luggage, the screen revealed what appeared to be hollow spaces that didn't correspond with the bag's apparent contents. "This is interesting," Patricia muttered, showing James the scanner readout. "There are definitely modifications here. See these areas? The density is all wrong for a standard travel bag." Cordelia's mind raced as she searched for an explanation that might satisfy the officers without revealing the truth. "I had the bag repaired recently," she offered. "Perhaps the craftsman made some structural changes during the restoration process." James and Patricia exchanged glances. In their experience, innocent explanations for luggage modifications were rare. They had dealt with enough smuggling cases to recognize the signs of professional concealment work. The detailed examination continued for nearly 30 minutes as the officers used various tools to probe the bag's construction. Finally, James located a nearly invisible seam along one side of the luggage that didn't match the bag's original design. With Patricia's help, he carefully opened the hidden compartment. The emerald necklace was the first item they discovered, wrapped in soft black velvet and nestled in a foam-lined cavity. The green stones caught the harsh fluorescent light of the inspection room, casting dancing reflections on the walls. Even to untrained eyes, it was obviously an extremely valuable piece. Cordelia's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Her face went pale, and her hands began to shake visibly as she realized that her years of planning were falling apart in a matter of minutes. "Would you like to explain what this is?" Patricia asked, holding up the necklace while James continued searching the bag. It's a family heirloom," Cordelia stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "My grandmother left it to me. I was taking it to Geneva to have it appraised." James discovered the second compartment containing the diamond tiara, and then the third with the ruby earrings. The small room suddenly felt charged with tension as the full scope of what they had uncovered became apparent. Patricia had seen many valuable items during her career, but the quality and apparent age of these pieces suggested they were more than simple family jewelry. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and the precious stones were of museum quality. She made the decision to contact her supervisor immediately. Within minutes of Patricia's call, the small inspection room became the center of intense activity. Detective Inspector Margaret Reynolds arrived first, followed by a team of specialists from the Metropolitan Police's Art and Antiques Unit. The discovery of what appeared to be priceless jewelry in a smuggling operation had triggered protocols reserved for the most serious cases. Detective Inspector Reynolds was a veteran investigator with 25 years of experience in art crime. She had worked on cases involving stolen masterpieces, forged antiquities, and international smuggling rings. The moment she saw the three pieces laid out on the inspection table, she recognized that this was no ordinary case. Cordelia sat in a plastic chair, her designer outfit now wrinkled, and her composed demeanor completely shattered. The false passport in the name of Sarah Mitchell had been discovered during a more thorough search of her belongings, along with several other suspicious documents that suggested this was part of a larger, more sophisticated operation. "These pieces are extraordinary," Reynolds observed, photographing each item from multiple angles. "The craftsmanship suggests royal or noble provenance, possibly dating back several centuries. Ms. Mitchell, or should I say Ms. Ashworth, these are not the kind of items one typically inherits from grandmother." The detective's use of Cordelia's real name sent another shock through the former royal aide. Her carefully constructed false identity had been uncovered through fingerprint analysis, revealing her true background and her years of service at Thornfield Palace. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a leading expert in royal jewelry and artifacts, arrived to examine the pieces more closely. Her preliminary assessment confirmed everyone's suspicions. These were not reproductions or family heirlooms. The emerald necklace bore the distinctive setting style of master jeweler Giovanni Romano, who had worked exclusively for European royalty in the 16th century. The diamond tiara showed characteristics of the renowned House of Cartier, specifically from a collection created for Queen Margaret's great-grandmother's wedding in 1923. The ruby earrings match descriptions in historical records of pieces commissioned for Queen Margaret's own wedding celebration. These items are part of the crown jewels collection of the Kingdom of Valdoria, Dr. Hartwell announced. I've studied these pieces extensively in my research. They should be secured in the royal vault at Thornfield Palace, not in someone's luggage at an airport. The implications of Dr. Hartwell's identification sent ripples through the investigation team. This was not simply a case of theft, but potentially the largest heist of royal treasures in modern history. Detective Inspector Reynolds immediately contacted Interpol and the Valdorian authorities to report the discovery. Cordelia's questioning intensified as investigators realized they might be dealing with an inside job of unprecedented scale. Her years of access to Thornfield Palace, combined with her intimate knowledge of the royal collection's security procedures, made her the perfect candidate for such an operation. "How long has this been going on, Ms. Ashworth?" Reynolds asked during the formal interview that began 3 hours after the initial discovery. "These pieces represent just a fraction of the royal collection. What else have you taken?" Cordelia's lawyer, hastily summoned from a prestigious London law firm, advised her to remain silent. However, the weight of evidence was already overwhelming. Beyond the jewelry found in her possession, investigators had discovered detailed floor plans of Thornfield Palace in her apartment, along with photographs of dozens of other valuable items from the royal collection. The search of Cordelia's residence revealed the true scope of her operation. Hidden throughout her modest flat were 17 additional pieces from the royal collection, including ornate silver candlesticks, rare manuscript books, and several paintings from the palace's private galleries. The total value of recovered items exceeded £20 million, but investigators suspected this represented only a portion of what had been stolen. Financial records seized from Cordelia's apartment told an interesting story. Over the past 2 years, she had made several trips to Geneva, Zurich, and Monaco. Bank records showed large deposits following these trips, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. The pattern suggested a sophisticated money laundering operation designed to convert stolen royal artifacts into untraceable cash. Detective Inspector Reynolds worked through the night, coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to trace the network of buyers and dealers who had been purchasing stolen royal treasures. The investigation revealed a web of corrupt art dealers, private collectors, and middlemen who specialized in acquiring items with questionable provenance. The most shocking discovery came when investigators found Cordelia's detailed records of every piece she had stolen. Methodical and organized, she had maintained a comprehensive inventory that included photographs, historical research, and estimated values for each item. Her records indicated that over the course of 2 years, she had successfully sold 43 pieces from the royal collection, generating approximately £35 million in illegal profits. The Kingdom of Valdoria's Minister of Cultural Heritage, Lord Sebastian Blackwood, arrived in London the following morning to assess the situation personally. The theft of such significant national treasures was not merely a criminal matter, but a diplomatic crisis that threatened the kingdom's cultural heritage. Queen Margaret would be heartbroken to know that someone she trusted had betrayed her memory in such a devastating way, Lord Blackwood stated during a press conference. "These artifacts are not merely valuable objects, but irreplaceable links to our nation's history and identity." The international media seized upon the story, dubbing it the Palace Betrayal, and comparing it to some of history's most notorious art thefts. News outlets around the world ran extensive coverage of Cordelia's arrest and the recovery of the stolen treasures. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged about Cordelia's methodology. She had exploited her position of trust systematically, timing her thefts to coincide with periods when the royal family was traveling or when security procedures were temporarily relaxed for maintenance or special events. Her intimate knowledge of the palace's inventory system had allowed her to target pieces that wouldn't be missed immediately. She focused on items stored in secondary locations or pieces that were only displayed on special occasions. By the time her thefts were discovered, many of the stolen items had already been sold to collectors around the world. The psychological profile developed by criminal psychologists painted a picture of someone who had gradually convinced herself that her actions were justified. Cordelia had apparently believed that her years of loyal service entitled her to compensation beyond her salary, and that the royal family's vast wealth made her thefts insignificant. However, interviews with her former colleagues revealed a different side of the story. Several palace staff members reported that Cordelia had become increasingly bitter in her final years of service, particularly after being passed over for a promotion to a senior administrative position. Her resentment toward the royal family had apparently grown over time, providing the emotional justification for her criminal actions. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Cordelia had been planning her ultimate escape for over a year. The false passport found in her possession was just one of several fake identities she had created. Investigators discovered safe deposit boxes in 3 different countries containing additional false documents, cash, and evidence of property purchases made under assumed names. Detective Inspector Reynolds realized that if not for the eagle-eyed security officers at Heathrow, Cordelia might have successfully disappeared with her latest haul, leaving behind a decades-long mystery about the missing royal treasures. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Detective Inspector Reynolds received a call from Interpol headquarters in Lyon. Agent Philippe Dubois, a specialist in international art trafficking, had been monitoring suspicious activities involving Valdorian royal artifacts appearing on the black market for over 18 months. Cordelia's arrest had provided the missing piece of a much larger puzzle. We've been tracking sales of items matching descriptions from the Valdorian royal inventory across Europe, Agent Dubois explained during a secure video conference. Geneva, Monaco, Zurich, and even some private auctions in Dubai. The sellers were always different, but the items shared characteristics that suggested a common source. The international scope of the investigation expanded rapidly as law enforcement agencies across multiple countries began sharing information. Swiss authorities raided the Geneva office of Marcel Rothstein, an art dealer who had been one of Cordelia's primary contacts. The raid uncovered a sophisticated network of corrupt dealers, private collectors, and forgers who specialized in laundering stolen artifacts from European royal collections. Rothstein's computers contained detailed records of transactions involving not just Valdorian treasures, but stolen items from royal collections across Europe. The network had been operating for over a decade, facilitating the theft and sale of priceless cultural artifacts from palaces, museums, and private collections throughout the continent. The discovery of this international conspiracy elevated Cordelia's case from a simple theft to part of a transnational criminal enterprise. Europol, the European Union's law enforcement agency, took coordinating responsibility for what had become known as Operation Golden Crown, an investigation into the systematic looting of Europe's cultural heritage. Back in London, Cordelia faced a new round of questioning as investigators sought to understand her role in the larger network. Her lawyer, Richard Pemberton, had initially planned to argue for leniency based on her years of faithful service, but the evidence of systematic, large-scale theft made such a defense nearly impossible. Ms. Ashworth, we have evidence that you were in contact with known art traffickers across Europe, Detective Inspector Reynolds presented during an interview. Bank records show payments from accounts linked to organized crime groups. This goes far beyond opportunistic theft. Cordelia's calm facade had completely crumbled by this point. Faced with evidence of her extensive criminal activities, she began to provide information about the network she had been working with. Her testimony revealed a sophisticated operation that recruited insiders from various royal households, museums, and private collections across Europe. The recruitment process was methodical and patient. Criminal organizers would identify employees with access to valuable collections who showed signs of financial stress or personal grievances against their employers. They would then gradually introduce these individuals to buyers who would pay substantial sums for specific items, usually starting with small, seemingly insignificant pieces before escalating to major thefts. Cordelia described how she had been approached initially by someone claiming to be a legitimate art historian researching the royal collection. The approach seemed innocent at first, just academic interest in certain pieces and their historical significance. However, over several months, the conversations gradually shifted toward discussions of the item's market value and the possibility of private sales. They made it seem so reasonable, Cordelia explained during her confession. They said these items were just sitting in storage, never displayed, never appreciated. They argued that private collectors would actually care for them better than the royal family, who had so many pieces they couldn't properly maintain them all. The psychological manipulation employed by the criminal network was sophisticated and effective. They had studied their targets carefully, understanding exactly what arguments would resonate with each potential recruit. For Cordelia, they emphasized themes of underappreciation and entitlement, gradually convincing her that her actions were justified. Swiss investigators made significant progress in tracking down stolen items that had been sold through the network. Many pieces had been acquired by wealthy private collectors who claimed they had purchased them in good faith through seemingly legitimate dealers. However, the provenance documentation for these items was revealed to be sophisticated forgeries. One of the most significant recoveries came from the private collection of Russian oligarch Viktor Volkov, whose London mansion contained 12 items that had been stolen from Thornfield Palace over the previous 2 years. Volkov claimed ignorance of the items' illegal status, but investigators found evidence that he had specifically commissioned the theft of several particular pieces after viewing them during an official state visit to Valdoria. The international investigation revealed that the theft ring had targeted royal collections across Europe with military precision. Similar operations had been uncovered in Denmark, where a curator at the royal collection had been selling rare manuscripts, and in Belgium, where a security guard had been providing access to thieves targeting the royal art collection. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell worked tirelessly with international experts to catalog and authenticate the recovered items. The process was complicated by the fact that many pieces had been altered or restored by criminal organizations attempting to obscure their origins. Some items had been broken apart, with valuable gems removed and reset in modern jewelry to make them harder to identify. What we're seeing is cultural vandalism on an unprecedented scale, Dr. Hartwell reported to a special session of the European Parliament's Committee on Culture and Education. These criminals weren't just stealing valuable objects. They were destroying irreplaceable links to European cultural heritage. The investigation uncovered evidence that some items had been destroyed entirely when they proved too recognizable to sell. Photographs found on Rothstein's computers showed priceless artifacts being broken down for their raw materials, gold melted down, gems removed, and recut, rare books dismantled for their illuminated pages. Public reaction to the revelations was intense throughout Europe. Citizens expressed outrage that trusted employees had systematically looted their cultural heritage for personal profit. The case sparked debates about security procedures at cultural institutions and the international art market's responsibility for verifying the provenance of valuable items. Queen Margaret's successor, King Alexander III of Valdoria, addressed the nation in a televised speech about the thefts. These crimes represent not just theft of valuable objects, but an assault on our collective memory and identity, he stated. We must ensure that those responsible face the full consequences of their actions, and that we strengthen our protections for future generations. The scale of the criminal network continued to expand as more evidence was uncovered. Investigators identified links to similar operations in Spain, Austria, and the Netherlands. The total value of stolen and recovered items exceeded 200 million euros, making it one of the largest art theft cases in European history. Cordelia found herself at the center of international attention as the media portrayed her as the face of cultural crime. Her transformation from trusted royal aide to international art thief fascinated the public and sparked discussions about loyalty, greed, and the psychological factors that drive seemingly respectable people to commit serious crimes. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but her cooperation with international investigators had provided crucial intelligence that led to the recovery of dozens of stolen artifacts and the arrest of key figures in the trafficking network. Her lawyer began negotiations for a plea agreement that would reduce her sentence in exchange for continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. 6 months after her arrest at Heathrow Airport, Cordelia Ashworth faced trial at the Old Bailey in what media outlets dubbed the trial of the century. The case had captured international attention not just for the enormous value of the stolen artifacts, but for the betrayal of trust it represented and the extensive criminal network it had exposed. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal experts, and representatives from museums and cultural institutions across Europe. The prosecution, led by Sir Jonathan Blackwell, one of Britain's most respected criminal barristers, had assembled a case that seemed overwhelming in its scope and detail. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sir Jonathan began his opening statement. You will hear evidence of betrayal on a scale that defies comprehension. The defendant, entrusted with the care of her nation's most precious cultural treasures, systematically looted them for personal gain over a period of more than 2 years. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented bank records showing millions of pounds flowing through Cordelia's accounts, correspondence with international art dealers, and her own meticulous records documenting each theft. The recovered artifacts were displayed in the courtroom under heavy security, their beauty and historical significance evident to all present. James Potter and Patricia Williams, the Heathrow security officers whose diligence had uncovered the plot, testified about the discovery of the hidden jewelry. Their testimony was compelling and straightforward, establishing the crucial evidence that had unraveled Cordelia's entire operation. "I've been working airport security for 11 years, James told the court. "You develop an instinct for nervous travelers, and something about Ms. Ashworth immediately caught my attention. Her behavior didn't match her appearance. She looked confident, but acted anxious." Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell provided expert testimony about the historical and cultural significance of the stolen items. Her presentation included detailed analysis of each recovered piece, their provenance, and their importance to Valdorian and European cultural heritage. "These are not merely valuable objects," Dr. Hartwell explained to the jury. "They are irreplaceable links to our past, artifacts that tell the story of European civilization. When someone steals and attempts to sell these items, they are stealing from all of us, from current generations and from future ones who will never have the opportunity to experience these treasures." The international scope of the case was illustrated through testimony from law enforcement officials from Switzerland, Monaco, France, and other countries where stolen items had been recovered. Agent Philippe Dubois from Interpol provided a comprehensive overview of the trafficking network that had been exposed through Cordelia's arrest. "This was not the work of an amateur or someone acting impulsively," Agent Dubois testified. "The defendant was part of a sophisticated international criminal organization that had been systematically targeting European cultural institutions for over a decade. Her insider access made her particularly valuable to this network." The defense, led by Richard Pemberton, faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against Cordelia was overwhelming, documented in her own handwriting and supported by physical evidence recovered from multiple countries. Pemberton's strategy focused on mitigation rather than denial, attempting to present Cordelia as a victim of manipulation rather than a willing criminal mastermind. "My client was recruited and manipulated by experienced criminals who exploited her financial vulnerabilities and personal grievances," Pemberton argued. "She was not the architect of this scheme, but rather a tool used by others more sophisticated and experienced in international art trafficking." Pemberton presented evidence of Cordelia's financial struggles, including medical bills for her elderly mother and her own mounting debts. He argued that the criminal network had deliberately targeted her during a period of personal vulnerability, gradually drawing her into criminal activity through careful psychological manipulation. The defense also highlighted Cordelia's cooperation with international investigators after her arrest. Her testimony and evidence had led to the recovery of millions of pounds worth of stolen artifacts and the arrest of key figures in the trafficking network. Ms. Ashworth's cooperation has been instrumental in dismantling an international criminal enterprise, Pemberton told the jury. "While we do not excuse her actions, we ask you to consider the broader context and her efforts to make amends for her crimes." Several character witnesses testified on Cordelia's behalf, including former colleagues from Thornfield Palace who described her as dedicated and conscientious during her early years of service. Her former supervisor, Lady Margaret Worthington, spoke emotionally about Cordelia's care for Queen Margaret during the monarch's final years. "Cordelia was devoted to Queen Margaret," Lady Worthington testified. "She worked long hours, often without additional compensation, ensuring the Queen's comfort and dignity. Her actions in recent years are completely inconsistent with the person I knew for over a decade." However, the prosecution's case was relentless in its presentation of evidence showing the systematic and calculated nature of Cordelia's crimes. Sir Jonathan presented evidence that Cordelia had been researching the market values of royal artifacts for over 3 years, long before she claimed to have been approached by criminal recruiters. "This was not someone who was manipulated into occasional theft," Sir Jonathan argued during his closing statement. "The evidence shows deliberate, systematic looting carried out over years, with careful planning and sophisticated methods designed to avoid detection." The prosecution also presented evidence that Cordelia had attempted to recruit other palace employees into the theft ring. Recorded conversations showed her trying to convince junior staff members to provide access to secured areas or to overlook suspicious activities. Expert testimony from criminal psychologists provided insight into the mindset that drove Cordelia's transformation from trusted employee to international art thief. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in white-collar crime, explained how seemingly ordinary people could rationalize increasingly serious criminal behavior. We see a pattern of gradual escalation, Dr. Mitchell testified. The defendant began with minor thefts that she justified as compensation for perceived unfair treatment. Over time, these justifications became more elaborate, allowing her to rationalize increasingly serious crimes. The international dimension of the case was highlighted through testimony about the broader impact of cultural theft. UNESCO Representative Maria Gonzalez spoke about the global problem of trafficking in cultural artifacts and the importance of prosecuting those who participate in such networks. Cultural theft is not a victimless crime, Gonzalez testified. When artifacts are stolen and sold on the black market, entire societies lose access to their cultural heritage. The defendant's actions contributed to a criminal enterprise that has impoverished cultural institutions across Europe. The trial lasted for 3 weeks, with extensive media coverage throughout. Public opinion was largely unsympathetic to Cordelia, particularly after details emerged about the scale of her thefts and the sophisticated methods she had employed. The prosecution's final presentation included a comprehensive accounting of the financial impact of Cordelia's crimes. Beyond the immediate value of stolen items, the prosecution calculated additional costs, including increased security measures, investigation expenses, and the resources required for recovery and authentication of stolen pieces. The total cost of the defendant's crimes exceeds £50 million, Sir Jonathan told the jury. This includes not just the value of stolen items, but the enormous expense of investigation, recovery, and the implementation of enhanced security measures necessary to prevent future thefts. As the trial concluded, both sides presented their final arguments to a jury that had heard 3 weeks of detailed testimony about one of the most extensive art theft cases in modern history. The evidence was overwhelming, but the complexity of the case and its international implications made it one of the most closely watched criminal trials in recent memory. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning their verdict. The foreman stood solemnly as he announced guilty on all 27 counts, including theft, conspiracy to traffic stolen goods, money laundering, and fraud. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and satisfaction from the packed gallery of observers, journalists, and victims of the international art trafficking ring. Judge Sir William Harrison, presiding over his final major case before retirement, took an additional week to consider sentencing. The complexity of the case, its international implications, and the unprecedented scale of cultural theft required careful consideration of appropriate penalties. Ms. Ashworth, Judge Harrison addressed the defendant during the sentencing hearing. Your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of our cultural heritage. You were entrusted with the care of irreplaceable artifacts that belong not just to the royal family, but to the people of Valdoria and, indeed, to all humanity. The judge sentenced Cordelia to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years conditional on her continued cooperation with international investigators. The sentence was among the harshest ever imposed for cultural crimes in British legal history, reflecting both the scale of the theft and its international implications. Your systematic looting of the royal collection represents cultural vandalism of the highest order, Judge Harrison continued. These artifacts are irreplaceable links to our shared history, and your actions have deprived current and future generations of their cultural inheritance. In addition to the prison sentence, the court ordered Cordelia to pay restitution of £37 million, representing the full value of items stolen and the costs of investigation and recovery. Since most of her criminal proceeds had already been seized by authorities, the restitution order effectively ensured she would remain financially liable for her crimes for the rest of her life. The international ramifications of the case continued to unfold long after Cordelia's sentencing. Operation Golden Crown, the international investigation that had grown from her arrest, led to prosecutions across Europe. Marcel Rothstein, the Geneva art dealer, received a 15-year sentence in Switzerland. Viktor Volkov, the Russian oligarch, faced asset forfeiture proceedings in multiple countries and was banned from entering the European Union. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell led an international effort to catalog and repatriate stolen artifacts recovered through the investigation. The process was complex and time-consuming, as many items had been altered or damaged during their time in the illegal art trade. Some pieces required extensive restoration before they could be returned to their original collections. We've recovered approximately 60% of the items that were stolen through this network, Dr. Hartwell reported to an international conference on cultural protection 6 months after Cordelia's sentencing. However, the emotional and cultural damage cannot be quantified. Some items were irreparably damaged, and others remain missing, possibly destroyed or sold to collectors who have not yet been identified. The Kingdom of Valdoria implemented comprehensive security reforms at Thornfield Palace and other royal properties. The changes included enhanced background checks for all employees, improved inventory tracking systems, and sophisticated monitoring technology designed to detect unauthorized access to secured areas. King Alexander III established the Queen Margaret Foundation for Cultural Protection, funded partly through the recovery of assets from the criminal network. The foundation provides grants for security improvements at museums and cultural institutions across Europe and supports international efforts to combat art trafficking. James Potter and Patricia Williams, the airport security officers whose diligence had initiated the investigation, received commendations from both the British government and the Kingdom of Valdoria. James was promoted to Senior Security Inspector, while Patricia accepted a position with Interpol's Art Crime Division. "I still think about that day," James reflected during an interview a year after the incident. "If we had missed the signs, if we hadn't decided to conduct the additional inspection, this criminal network might have continued operating for years." It's sobering to realize how much history could have been lost. The case sparked widespread reforms in the international art trade. New regulations required enhanced provenance documentation for valuable artifacts, and major auction houses implemented more stringent verification procedures. The European Union established a central database for tracking stolen cultural objects, making it harder for trafficked items to be sold through legitimate channels. Cordelia's former colleagues at Thornfield Palace struggled with the revelation of her crimes. Many had considered her a friend and had trusted her completely during their years of working together. The betrayal was particularly painful for those who had confided personal problems to her, not knowing that she was evaluating their potential as recruitment targets for the criminal network. Lady Margaret Worthington, Cordelia's former supervisor, established new protocols for employee monitoring and support. "We learned that isolation and financial stress can make even dedicated employees vulnerable to criminal recruitment," she explained. "We now have better systems for identifying staff who might need assistance before they become targets for criminal organizations." The psychological impact on the royal family was significant, though they maintained their dignity throughout the ordeal. Queen Margaret's personal collection had been assembled over decades, with many pieces having deep sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. The knowledge that someone trusted with their care had systematically looted these treasures for profit was deeply painful. Cordelia's imprisonment was marked by continued cooperation with international investigators. From her cell, she provided ongoing assistance in identifying other members of the trafficking network and locating additional stolen items. Her detailed knowledge of the criminal organization's operations proved invaluable in dismantling other cells of the network. Prison psychologists worked with Cordelia to understand the psychological factors that had led to her criminal behavior. Their research contributed to better understanding of how trusted employees can be turned into criminal accomplices, helping cultural institutions develop better protective strategies. "She expresses genuine remorse for her actions," reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the prison psychologist assigned to Cordelia's case. However, she also demonstrates how sophisticated criminal organizations can exploit personal vulnerabilities to recruit unlikely accomplices. Her case study has become important for training security professionals in cultural institutions. The recovery efforts continued for years after Cordelia's trial. International law enforcement agencies established permanent task forces dedicated to tracking down artifacts that remained missing from the investigation. Some items were recovered years later, often from private collectors who had purchased them through seemingly legitimate channels. The case established important legal precedents for prosecuting international art trafficking. Courts across Europe used Cordelia's case as a model for handling complex cultural crime prosecutions, particularly those involving trusted insiders who exploit their positions for criminal gain. 5 years after her arrest at Heathrow Airport, Cordelia remained in prison, serving her sentence while continuing to assist international investigators. The artifacts recovered through her case had been returned to their rightful collections, where enhanced security measures ensured they would be protected for future generations. The legacy of her crimes extended far beyond the individual pieces she had stolen. The case had fundamentally changed how cultural institutions approached security, how the international art market verified provenance, and how law enforcement agencies cooperated to protect global cultural heritage. The woman who had once been trusted with caring for some of Europe's most precious cultural treasures had become a cautionary tale about the importance of vigilance in protecting our shared heritage. Her story served as a reminder that the greatest threats to cultural security often come from those we trust most, and that protecting our cultural inheritance requires constant vigilance and international cooperation. The emerald necklace, diamond tiara, and ruby earrings that had been discovered in her luggage that fateful day at Heathrow were eventually returned to their places in the royal collection, where they remained under enhanced security, protected for future generations who would never know how close they had come to losing these irreplaceable links to their cultural past.